The seat in first class airport was alive that morning, buzzing with the kind of energy only travelers could bring. Announcements echoed across the vast terminal. Footsteps hurried past polished floors, and the faint smell of coffee drifted through the air. Sundar Pichai walked quietly among the crowd, dressed in simple jeans, a faded jacket, and plain shoes. He carried a small black backpack slung over one shoulder, the same one he had been using for years. Nothing about him suggested power or wealth, and that was exactly how he liked it. He had meetings waiting for him overseas, meetings that could shape the future of entire industries, yet he never felt the need to draw attention to himself. For him, life was about focus, humility, and remembering where he came from. But as he approached the gate for his flight, the people around him didn't see the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies. They saw just another ordinary man, one who looked almost out of place in the first-class boarding line. When boarding began, Sundar stepped forward quietly, handing his ticket to the attendant at the counter. She scanned it, smiled politely, and wished him a good flight. Sundar nodded with the same soft smile he always carried. He walked into the jet bridge. Feeling the rush of cool air from the cabin ahead, inside the aircraft, the first-class section glowed with luxury. Wide seats stretched like armchairs. Sparkling glasses sat ready for drinks, and passengers already in their seats adjusted their suits and silk scarves. Sundar walked calmly toward his assigned seat, his ticket showing the number clearly. He slid his bag under the seat and sat down. Glancing out of the small oval window, that was when she appeared, the flight attendant who was assigned to first class. She was tall, elegant, and confident, moving down the aisle with the practiced authority of someone who believed she was in control. She stopped abruptly when her eyes landed on Sundar. "Sir," she said. Her tone clipped. "I think you're in the wrong section. Economy is further back." The words cut through the quiet hum of boarding, and a few nearby passengers turned their heads. Sundar lifted his eyes slowly, surprised, but he kept his voice calm. "This is my seat," he said gently, holding up his ticket as proof. The attendant frowned, leaning closer to glance at the slip of paper in his hand. She scanned it, then looked back at him with doubt written across her face. "Are you sure? This isn't a mistake? First-class seats are for premium passengers only. You must have been upgraded by accident." A murmur ran through the cabin. One passenger, a man in a sharp suit, smirked from across the aisle. Another, a woman holding a designer handbag, shook her head slightly as if agreeing with the attendant. Sundar felt their eyes on him, weighing him, judging him. He shifted slightly in his seat but did not raise his voice. "This is the seat number on my ticket," he repeated calmly. The flight attendant crossed her arms, her tone growing sharper. "Sir, I've worked on this airline for years. People sometimes try to sneak into seats they haven't paid for. It's important we keep this cabin exclusive for those who belong here. So please, let's not create a scene. I'll help you find your correct seat in economy." The word belong hung in the air, heavy and cold. Sundar glanced again at the ticket in his hand, his name printed clearly. He knew he had every right to sit there. But at that moment, he felt something deeper than embarrassment. He felt the sting of being underestimated, of being dismissed without being given a chance. Passengers around him whispered. One man whispered to his wife, "He probably can't afford this." Another chuckled softly, not even trying to hide it. Sundar heard every sound, but he didn't let his expression change. His years of experience had taught him the value of patience, of letting people reveal who they truly were before responding. Instead of arguing, Sundar leaned back slightly and said, "Please check again. I assure you this is my seat." The flight attendant narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. She leaned down toward another passenger, lowering her voice, but not enough to escape Sundar's ears. "I don't know how he got this ticket," she whispered, "but it doesn't look right. He doesn't look like first-class material." That phrase, first-class material, echoed inside him. It wasn't the first time in his life that someone had judged him by his appearance. He had faced it. As a student, as a young engineer, even in boardrooms where he was the quietest voice among loud egos. Yet every time he had proven them wrong, not by shouting, but by showing his worth. But here, on this plane, it wasn't just about him. The humiliation was public. The smirks, the whispers, the doubt, it all pressed against him like a wall. Before he could respond, another voice cut into the moment. What seems to be the problem here? It was the purser, the senior attendant, walking in from the galley. She looked from the younger flight attendant to Sundar, then back. This passenger is in the wrong seat, the attendant said quickly, almost eager to prove her point. He must be from economy. This section is full, and we can't have mistakes. The purser took Sundar's ticket from his hand, studying it carefully. Her eyes flicked to him, then to the seat number, then back again. There was a pause, a silence so thick the air seemed to stop moving. Finally, she said softly, "This is his seat. It's correct." The younger attendant's face froze, her confidence faltering for the first time. Passengers who had been watching suddenly turned away, pretending to mind their own business. But the damage was already done. Sundar could feel the weight of their earlier judgments still lingering in the air. He sat quietly, but inside his chest something stirred. Not anger exactly, but a sharp ache of disappointment. People had looked at him, and without knowing who he was or what he stood for, they had decided he didn't belong. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the purser moved away, leaving the younger attendant standing awkwardly near Sundar's seat. Her lips tightened, and though she didn't apologize, she muttered, "Enjoy your flight, sir." Sundar gave a small nod, not out of satisfaction, but out of restraint. He turned his eyes back to the window, watching as the ground crew moved. Around the plane, the engines roared to life. The plane trembled slightly as it prepared to lift into the sky. Sundar's reflection shimmered faintly against the glass. He thought of his journey from a small home in India to the heights of global leadership and how, even now, people still doubted him based on nothing more than what they saw. He breathed. Deeply, steady, and calm, but in the quiet of his mind, a question lingered. How many more times would he have to face this kind of judgment? The plane rolled forward, the world outside rushing past faster and faster. As the nose tilted upward and the cabin lifted off the ground, Sundar closed his eyes. He had no idea that what happened next on this flight would not only test his patience, but also reveal truths about respect, kindness, and human dignity in ways no one on board could forget. And just as the seatbelt sign blinked above, a voice came from behind him, a voice filled with panic. "Help! Someone's not breathing." The cabin froze. The emergency in the sky voice of panic filled the first-class cabin like a sudden storm. People who only moments earlier had been sipping champagne and adjusting their seats now turned with wide eyes. Their conversations cut short. The words, "Help! Someone's not breathing," echoed through the air, heavy with fear. Sundar opened his eyes and turned quickly. Just a few rows behind him, a man in his 60s slumped sideways against his seat. His skin had gone pale, his chest barely moving, his mouth slightly open. His wife sat beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to shake him awake. Tears were already spilling down her cheeks as she pleaded, "Please, somebody, help him." The younger flight attendant, the very one who had humiliated Sundar minutes earlier, rushed over. Her polished confidence seemed to falter in the face of true crisis. She called out for the medical kit, her voice trembling, while fumbling to unbuckle the man's seatbelt. Passengers leaned into the aisle, some standing, others frozen in fear. The calm luxury of first class dissolved into raw panic. Sundar felt his heart race, but not from fear for himself. It was the urgency of knowing that in moments like this, status, wealth, or judgment meant nothing. What mattered was action, human action. Without hesitation, he stood from his seat. "Move the seat back," Sundar said firmly, his tone steady yet filled with urgency. The attendant looked at him, startled. She still carried doubt in her eyes, as if she couldn't decide whether to trust him. But the purser, who had confirmed Sundar's seat earlier, appeared behind her and nodded sharply. "Listen to him. Do it." The seat was reclined quickly. And Sundar knelt beside the man. His wife looked at Sundar with desperation, searching for hope in his face. Sundar reached out, checking for a pulse at the man's neck. For a second, the world seemed to narrow to just that small space between his fingers and the man's fragile life. There was a faint beat. Weak, irregular, but still there. Sundar exhaled, then looked up. He has a pulse, but it's faint. We need oxygen. Now. The purser grabbed the emergency kit and pulled out the portable oxygen tank. Sundar guided her to fit the mask securely over the man's nose and mouth. A faint hiss of air filled the silence. Passengers held their breath as they watched, unsure. Whether to hope or fear, the wife clutched Sundar's arm, whispering through tears, "Please don't let him die." Sundar looked into her eyes and nodded softly. "We'll do everything we can." The younger attendant hovered nearby, still shaken, her earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. Her hands trembled as she passed items from the kit, following Sundar's calm instructions. She kept stealing glances at him, as though seeing him. For the first time, not as a man who didn't belong in first class, but as someone who carried a quiet authority that demanded respect. Minutes stretched painfully. The man's breathing grew shallow, then steadier with the oxygen. His chest rose with more rhythm, though his body remained weak. Sundar kept his hand on the man's wrist, monitoring his pulse, while speaking gently to reassure the wife. The plane itself seemed to share in the tension. The engines roared outside, steady as ever, but inside the cabin. Every passenger leaned forward, whispering prayers or clenching hands together. Strangers who had judged Sundar minutes ago now looked at him differently. The purser picked up the intercom, speaking in a controlled voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation on board. If there is a licensed doctor or nurse among the passengers, please make yourself known immediately." A moment of silence followed. Then a man from business class appeared at the curtain. "I'm a cardiologist," he said quickly, stepping forward. Relief washed over the passengers as he joined Sundar at the man's side. The doctor knelt down, checked the pulse, and examined the man's breathing. He glanced at Sundar, their eyes meeting briefly. The doctor seemed surprised that Sundar had already stabilized the patient with oxygen and proper positioning. "Good work," the doctor muttered quietly before taking over. Sundar moved back, slightly, giving space but remaining close. The wife continued holding his hand, unwilling to let go of the quiet strength he had given her. After several tense minutes, the doctor announced, "He's stable for now, but we need to land as soon as possible. He requires hospital care." The purser nodded quickly and rushed to contact the cockpit. The captain's calm voice soon filled the intercom, explaining they would divert to the nearest airport for an emergency landing as the announcement ended. Sundar finally sat back into his seat, his heart still racing from the intensity of it all. He looked around the cabin and noticed the shift in atmosphere. The smirks, the whispers, the cold stares from earlier were gone. Instead, eyes followed him with something closer to awe, gratitude, or even shame. The younger flight attendant stood frozen near the galley, her face pale. She seemed unable to meet his gaze, as if the weight of her earlier words now pressed down on her. Sundar didn't stare at her or demand an apology. He simply leaned back, resting quietly, his focus still on the man fighting for life a few rows behind him, but deep inside, the moment stirred something powerful. Humiliation had turned into responsibility, and responsibility had revealed strength. This was the kind of test that stripped away appearances and exposed who people truly were. Sundar knew that in this small space, thousands of feet above the earth, lessons about respect and humility were unfolding in ways no one would forget yet. Even as the tension began to ease, Sundar sensed that this was only the beginning. The diversion, the landing, the choices yet to be made, everything carried weight. The wife of the man whispered again to Sundar, clutching his arm with teary eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for stepping up when no one else did." Sundar gave a gentle smile. "We're all in this together. No one is alone here." Her words, however, lingered longer than she knew. Because in that moment, as Sundar turned, Back toward the window, he saw something else, a shadow crossing the glass. The plane was banking hard, far sharper than normal. The pilot's calm voice returned over the speakers, but this time it carried a gravity that pulled at every heart in the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, we are experiencing an unexpected technical issue. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. We are preparing for an emergency landing. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The wife tightened her grip on Sundar's arm. The attendants scrambled to prepare passengers. Dot and Sundar, staring out at the vast clouds beyond, felt a chill. Humiliation was no longer the story. Survival was asterisk the fall of silence. Captain's voice still hung in the air, heavy with the kind of calm that was meant to stop panic, but somehow made it worse. An unexpected technical issue was all he said, but every passenger knew what that meant. Airplanes didn't bank sharply unless something was wrong. And when the pilot admitted there was a problem, it was no small matter. The cabin, once buzzing with whispers, fell into a tense silence broken only by the hum of engines and the faint clinking of glasses as the plane shook slightly. The passengers looked at each other with wide eyes, their earlier pride and judgment gone. Fear was an equalizer. It stripped away the walls people built around themselves and left only their humanity behind. Sundar sat upright, hands folded in his lap, his face calm, though his mind was racing. He had flown countless times before, but this was different. The situation wasn't in his control, and yet he knew his response mattered. People around him were watching, leaning on his composure. Like a lifeline in a storm, the wife of the man who had collapsed earlier still clung to his arm. Her tears had slowed, but her eyes darted anxiously between the window and her husband, who was now stable but still weak. What if we don't make it? She whispered. Her voice cracked, fragile with terror. Sundar turned to her. Gently, his voice soft but steady. Listen to me. We will get through this. The pilots are trained for these situations. Panic will only make things harder for everyone. Breathe with me. Just one breath at a time. His words, spoken with quiet assurance, had a ripple effect. Nearby passengers inhaled deeply, almost unconsciously following his lead. It was as if his calmness reached beyond his seat, settling like a blanket over those close enough to hear him. The younger flight attendant, the same one who had tried to push Sundar out of first class, moved down the aisle. Her voice shook as she repeated safety instructions, reminding passengers how to tighten seatbelts and locate life vests. The arrogance she had carried earlier was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. She glanced at Sundar while she spoke, as though silently asking him how he remained so composed when even she was crumbling inside. The turbulence grew sharper, the plane jolting with each shift of air. Glasses spilled, luggage compartments rattled, and the child in business class began to cry. His mother tried to hush him, but her own trembling hands betrayed her fear. Sundar unbuckled for a brief moment, leaning toward the aisle so his voice could carry. It's okay, he said gently to the child. You're safe. Pretend we are riding a bus on a bumpy road. Just bumps, nothing more. The boy's wide eyes met his, and for a second the crying eased. Sundar gave him a small nod, and the mother mouthed a grateful thank you through her tears. The purser's voice broke in again over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are diverting to the nearest airport. Our crew is prepared for all procedures. Her words were steady, but her eyes, visible as she set the microphone down, betrayed the tension. Time slowed. Every second stretched like an eternity. People clutched hands, whispered prayers, stared at the floor or ceiling as though searching for something to hold on to. Sundar felt the weight of all their emotions pressing into him, but instead of shrinking, he let it anchor him. He thought briefly of his childhood in India, crowded trains, long waits and sweltering heat, and simple resilience his parents had taught him. They had raised him to believe that no matter how chaotic the world became, patience and faith were stronger than fear. Now, in the middle of the sky, those lessons returned to him like a quiet song. And came the sound. A loud metallic groan reverberated through the cabin, followed by a sudden dip that sent stomachs into throats. People screamed. The man across the aisle gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Someone in the back shouted, "Are we crashing?" Panic erupted like fire spreading through dry grass. Sundar acted quickly. He unbuckled again, ignoring the warning chime, and stood in the aisle despite the shaking plane. His presence alone, tall and steady in the chaos, drew eyes to him. He raised his hand slightly, not commanding, but calming. "Listen," he said, his voice firm but warm, carrying above the cries. "Panicking will not help us. Look around you. You are not alone. We are in this together, and together we are strong. Trust the crew. Trust the pilots. Breathe. Hold the hand of the person next to you if you need to. This is not the end." The words struck something deep in the passengers. Strangers reached for each other's hands, creating a fragile chain of humanity through. The fear. Sobs softened into quiet gasps, and even the child who had been crying earlier buried his face in his mother's chest, but no longer screamed. The purser looked at Sundar with open admiration, while the younger attendant's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to say something, but couldn't bring herself to. Engines roared louder as the descent began. The city lights below grew brighter through the windows, shimmering like stars scattered across the earth. Sundar placed a hand on the seat in front of him, bracing against the jolts, and whispered to himself, "Steady, steady, we'll make it." But just as relief began to touch the edges of the cabin, a new crisis struck. The man who had collapsed earlier suddenly convulsed, his body jerking violently against the seatbelt. His wife screamed, clutching at him desperately. "Doctor!" the purser shouted. The cardiologist rushed forward again, fumbling with the medical kit. Sundar dropped back to his knees beside them. The earlier calmness now sharpened into urgent focus. The doctor's voice shook as he said, "He's going into cardiac arrest. I need space now." The aisle filled with noise, panic rising again. The wife sobbed uncontrollably, clutching her husband's hand as though afraid to let go. Passengers craned their necks, terror written across every face. The plane was minutes from landing, the ground racing closer, yet inside. A man's life hung by a fragile thread, and as the cardiologist prepared to begin chest compressions, he looked up at Sundar and said the words that froze the entire cabin. "I need your help, right now." Asterisk the weight of a heartbeat. Cabin felt like it had shrunk into a single, trembling moment. The doctor's eyes locked on Sundar's, his voice steady but urgent as he repeated, "I need your help, right now." Sundar did not hesitate. He slid to the narrow space beside the unconscious man, his knees pressing hard against the floor as the plane jolted in descent. The man's wife sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to her husband's limp hand, whispering prayers under her breath. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, straining to see. Their own fear mixing with desperate hope, the doctor began chest compressions, pressing down rhythmically on the man's chest. The sound of each push was drowned by the hum of engines and the muffled cries of those watching. 30 compressions, then breaths, the doctor muttered quickly. He looked at Sundar. "Count with me. Keep the rhythm steady." Sundar's voice, calm but strong, began to count aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number cut through the panic, anchoring the doctor's movements, anchoring the terrified passengers, anchoring the wife who clutched her husband's arm as though afraid he would slip away with every second. The plane shook again, dipping sharply as the landing gear extended. Oxygen masks swayed overhead, though they had not yet dropped. The younger flight attendant crouched nearby, her trembling hands clutching a bag valve mask, passing it quickly when the doctor called for air. She glanced at Sundar, her earlier arrogance now completely gone, her eyes filled with something new respect, and guilt for the way she had judged him before. "Breathe for him," the doctor instructed, placing the mask over the man's mouth and nose. Sundar leaned forward, squeezing the bag firmly, watching the man's chest rise. For a second, nothing happened. Then the chest fell again. The doctor resumed compressions. "Don't stop counting," he said dot, and so Sundar counted again, his voice unwavering even as the cabin tilted slightly with the sharp descent. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm filled the air, louder than the gasps and whispers of the passengers. The purser spoke to the cockpit through the intercom, her voice breaking slightly as she updated the pilot. "Medical team on the ground must be ready. Cardiac arrest on board." The pilot's reply came back, steady but quick. 2 minutes to landing. Brace for impact procedures in 1. Panic rippled through the cabin again. Passengers clutched their armrests, some crying, some holding hands, some whispering. Prayers. But their eyes still found Sundar, his calmness somehow reaching them even as he knelt on the floor of a shaking aircraft. The doctor paused compressions, checking for a pulse. Silence stretched. Sundar felt his chest tighten. Nothing. Continue. The doctor barked, his voice firm. He pressed again, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Don't give up. Keep counting." And so Sundar continued, louder this time, his voice almost a command to life itself. 1, 2, 3, 4. The wife buried her face against Sundar's shoulder, unable to watch, her tears soaking his jacket. Sundar did not flinch. He placed his free hand over hers, squeezing gently, silently promising he would not stop trying to. Suddenly, a sharp jolt rocked the plane. The tires touched down, screeching loudly as the aircraft hit the runway. Passengers screamed, some closing, their eyes as the plane bounced and roared. Overhead compartments rattled violently. A suitcase burst open and tumbled to the floor, but Sundar didn't break rhythm. Through the chaos of landing, his voice carried. 25, 26, 27. The doctor checked again. Still nothing. His jaw clenched. Defibrillator. Now. The purser yanked the bright orange case from the medical kit and slid it across the aisle. Sundar helped attach the sticky pads to the man's chest, his hands. Steady though his heart pounded. The machine powered on, its robotic voice announcing, analyzing heart rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." The cabin fell deathly silent. The only sound was the machine's beeping. The passengers' eyes were wide, every face pale, every breath caught. Then the words, "Shock advised." The doctor's voice was sharp, clear. He pressed the button. The man's body jerked violently against the seat. The wife screamed. The passengers gasped. Seconds stretched into eternity. The doctor checked the pulse. His expression was unreadable. Sundar leaned forward, desperate for any sign. Then, faintly, there it was. A beat, weak, irregular, but real. The wife collapsed against Sundar, sobbing with relief. The doctor exhaled, nodding quickly. "He's back." He's not out of danger, but he's back. The entire cabin erupted in shaky applause, tears, and whispers of gratitude. Strangers who had once sneered at Sundar now looked at him with reverence. Some even whispered his name, realizing who he was. Though they kept their voices low, the younger flight attendant stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She had judged him, humiliated him, and now she had watched him stand at the center of life and death, holding the fragile thread of hope for them all. The plane screeched to a halt on the runway. Paramedics rushed aboard within seconds, their uniforms and stretchers pushing through the narrow aisles. The doctor handed the patient over quickly, and Sundar stepped back, his hands finally trembling from the weight of what had just unfolded. The wife grabbed his hands once more before the paramedics wheeled her husband away. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved us all." Sundar shook his head softly. "No, we all stood together. That is what saved him." But as the paramedics disappeared down the aisle and the passengers exhaled in relief, Sundar felt something shift in the air. Because even as the crisis seemed to end, another storm was brewing quietly. The younger flight attendant, her face pale and streaked with tears, walked slowly towards Sundar. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, to apologize, to admit the truth of how wrong she had been. But before a single word could escape her mouth, The purser approached with urgency. Double quotes, Mr. Pichai, she said softly but firmly, her voice carrying weight. There are security officials waiting outside. They need to speak with you immediately. The entire cabin froze again. Whispers rippled like fire through dry leaves. Sundar's brows furrowed slightly. Security officials? Why him? And as the doors of the aircraft opened, revealing flashing lights outside, Sundar realized the journey was far from over. Asterisk questions at the gate. The cabin doors opened with a sharp hiss, and the bright lights from the tarmac spilled inside. Blue and red flashes from emergency vehicles painted the walls in uneasy colors. Paramedics wheeled the man who had suffered cardiac arrest quickly down the aisle, his wife holding his hand and whispering words of hope. Through her tears, passengers shifted to let them pass, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion after the storm of fear they had just survived. But amid the relief, there was another energy, a current of confusion and suspicion. Two security officials appeared at the entrance of the plane. Their dark uniforms and stern expressions silenced what little chatter had returned to the cabin. One of them spoke firmly, his voice carrying over the heads of the passengers. We need to speak with Mr. Sundar Pichai immediately. A ripple of whispers spread like fire. People turned their heads, some gasping softly, others mouthing his name as if they had just realized who he was. A man in the back whispered, "That's the CEO of Google," while another leaned closer to his wife and muttered, "Why would security need him?" The younger flight attendant froze in the aisle, her eyes wide as she looked back at Sundar. Moments earlier, she had been close to apologizing for her treatment of him, but now fear gripped her again. Had she made a mistake bigger than she realized? Had she disrespected someone with power far beyond what she understood? Sundar remained calm. He rose slowly from his seat, his jacket slightly rumpled, his hair disheveled from kneeling on the floor during the medical emergency. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way he stood, as if no amount of chaos or humiliation could shake the core of who he was. "I am Sundar," he said softly, stepping into the aisle. The official nodded. "Please come with us. There are urgent matters we must discuss." Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, casting nervous glances. A few of them who had earlier doubted and mocked Sundar now looked uneasy, realizing the man they had dismissed so easily carried a presence that drew the attention of not just attendants, but now law enforcement. As Sundar walked toward the door, the wife of the man whose life he had helped save reached out from where she stood with the paramedics. Her trembling hand caught his sleeve. "Please don't go with them if it's not safe," she whispered, desperately, as though fearful of losing the man who had given her hope in the darkest moment. Sundar gave her a reassuring smile, the same soft one he always carried in difficult times. "Don't worry. It will be fine," he said gently, though he himself did not know what awaited beyond the aircraft door. He stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the airport filling the space around him, the whir of engines cooling, the crackle of radios, the shuffle of hurried footsteps. Security vehicles lined the edge of the runway, their lights still flashing. The officials guided Sundar away from the stream of passengers, toward a quiet corner where the noise seemed to fade. Inside the cabin, passengers buzzed with speculation. The younger flight attendant stood rigid, her face pale. What if I treated the wrong person badly?" she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. "What if I humiliated the very man who saved us all?" The purser placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You did?" she said quietly, with no malice. "Only truth. And that is something you will carry until you make it right." Outside, Sundar stopped as the officials turned to him. Their expressions softened slightly, the severity replaced with a hint of respect. One of them spoke first. "Mr. Pichai, please understand, we mean no harm. We were alerted because some passengers reported suspicious activity during the flight. In moments of panic, misunderstandings happen. But when we realized your identity, we came ourselves to ensure your safety." As well, Sundar listened quietly. He had been judged when he boarded, humiliated for not looking like he belonged, And now he was being judged again, this time in whispers of suspicion. It was a reminder that no matter how high one rose in life, assumptions could still cut deep. Took a slow breath before responding. I understand. People were afraid. In fear, they see danger even where it does not exist. I hold no anger for that. The officials exchanged a glance. One of them nodded respectfully. You showed extraordinary composure in there, sir. Many passengers said you calmed them when even our crew struggled. And you helped save a man's life. Sundar shook his head softly. I only did what anyone should do. In crisis, titles mean nothing. We are simply people helping people. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted again. Passengers whispered about what they had seen, what they had done, and the shame that now hung heavy in their hearts. One man who had smirked earlier when the flight attendant questioned Sundar now pressed his palms together, whispering to his wife, I can't believe I doubted him. I laughed at the very man who kept us calm. The younger flight attendant sat in the galley, her hands covering her face. Tears slipped through her fingers. She replayed every word she had spoken to Sundar, every dismissive tone, every assumption about who belonged in first class. And now she realized that she had not only insulted a man, but insulted the very spirit of humility and kindness he carried that outside. The captain approached Sundar with quiet respect. Mr. Pichai, I wanted to. Thank you. Not only for helping with the medical emergency, but for steadying the entire cabin. Without you, panic could have made everything worse. I owe you my gratitude, Sundar simply nodded. The crew did their part. The passengers did theirs. In the end, it was all of us together. But as he spoke, he noticed the younger flight attendant stepping hesitantly out of the aircraft. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling as she walked toward him. The other crew members gave her space, watching silently. She stopped in front of him, unable to meet his eyes at first. Her voice cracked as she finally spoke. Sir, I was wrong. I judged you. I humiliated you. And I cannot take back the words I said. But I need you to know I am sorry. The silence that followed was heavy. The passengers who had begun to file out paused, watching. The officials waited quietly. The crew looked on, their expressions unreadable. Sundar stood still, his face calm, his eyes thoughtful. This was the moment where anger could have been justified, where pride could have demanded an apology be rejected. But instead, Sundar looked at her with a softness that stunned everyone around him. We all make mistakes, he said gently. What matters is what we learn from them. Never decide who belongs or doesn't belong by what they wear or how they look. Every person has a story you do not see. Her tears flowed harder, and she lowered her head. Thank you for being kinder than I deserved. But before Sundar could say another word, one of the officials stepped forward with a radio pressed to his ear. His face tightened, his voice low but urgent. Captain, we've just been informed. The airport has gone into partial lockdown. Something else is happening, and we need to move everyone quickly. Sundar's eyes narrowed slightly. He had thought the turbulence, the medical emergency, and the humiliation were the only tests of this journey. But now a larger shadow loomed, one that none of them had expected. The flashing lights outside grew brighter. Sirens wailed louder in the distance. The night was not finished with them yet. Asterisk, the last lessened air outside the aircraft pulsed. With tension, blue and red lights danced across the tarmac as sirens wailed in the distance. Security officials spoke urgently into radios, their faces hard with focus. Passengers gathered in small clusters near the plane, their luggage forgotten. Their whispers sharp with unease thought the announcement of a partial lockdown spread like wildfire. People speculated nervously. Some thought it was a security breach. Others murmured about threats or emergencies at the terminal, but no one really knew. Fear of the unknown hung heavier than the roar of engines still cooling around them. Sundar stood quietly among the chaos. His presence, though calm, drew eyes. Even in this uncertain moment, he seemed steady, as though storms could swirl around him but never uproot him. The younger flight attendant stood a few feet away, wiping at her tears, still shaken from her earlier humiliation of him. She wanted to step closer again to thank him once more, but the weight of the moment pressed her back. The captain approached Sundar with urgency. Mr. Pichai, we need to move you inside quickly. Officials believe there may be a security threat connected to certain passengers on board. It's possible your presence is part of why the alert was raised. The words stunned those who overheard. Passengers gasped. The whispers grew louder. Sundar, the man who had saved a life and calmed the cabin, was now being connected to a possible threat, but Sundar's face remained steady. He spoke softly yet clearly. If my presence brings suspicion, then let the truth show itself. I will walk inside with you. The officials guided him through the tunnel into the terminal. Passengers followed behind in a slow stream, clutching their bags, their nerves rattled. Some cast guilty glances at Sundar, remembering how they had doubted him when he first sat at first class. Now, seeing him questioned by security, they felt another layer of shame because they realized judgment was not only cruel, it was dangerous. Inside, the terminal was buzzing with uniformed officers. Announcements echoing over the intercom, and travelers pressed against walls as they were told to remain in place. Sundar was led to a quiet corner near a cordoned-off area where senior officials waited. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Mr. Pichai, I apologize for this interruption. The alert was raised because another passenger reported unusual behavior during the flight. In moments of fear, assumptions were made. Your name came up, but after review, it is clear you are not involved in any way. In fact, we have passengers who said you were the one holding the cabin together. The relief was immediate, but the shame was heavier. Sundar bowed his head slightly. Fear makes people see shadows where there are none. What matters is that we do not let fear blind us to truth. The officer nodded. You're right. And I believe the entire cabin has learned something tonight. Slowly, passengers began to gather around. One by one, they stepped forward not to accuse, but to apologize. The businessman who had smirked when Sundar was doubted earlier cleared his throat nervously. Sir, I judged you by your clothes, by your silence. I thought you didn't belong in first class. I see now how wrong I was. You held yourself with more dignity in crisis than any of us did. The woman with the designer handbag lowered her eyes. I looked at you like you didn't deserve your seat. And then I watched you give comfort to strangers, even while I stayed frozen. I am sorry. Even the child's mother, holding her son tightly, approached. You calmed my boy when I couldn't. He will remember your words far longer than mine. Fear. The younger flight attendant, trembling but determined, finally stepped forward again. Her voice cracked but carried through the group. Sir, you gave me more grace than I deserved. I thought first class meant wealth and appearances. I see now it means nothing without respect. I will carry this lesson for the rest of my life. Sundar looked at each of them, his eyes filled with quiet kindness. We are all human. We stumble, we judge, we fail, but we are also capable of learning, of growing, of becoming better. Tonight reminded me that humility is not weakness, it is strength. And kindness, even when undeserved, is the greatest power we hold.